Hello, my name is Connor Crowley, and today I will be doing a reading for you from my Choose Your Own Adventure novel, The Case of Wayne, a Wandering Head. As it is a Choose Your Own Adventure novel, choices are intended to be made by the reader. However, since I am reading for an internet audience today, I will be making the choices using the flip of a coin. If this reading makes you inspired to read the entire work, then please contact me and I will get it to you. Thank you. Let us begin. Wayne's breath was wet. He opened his eyes to the black concrete of a damp and broken alleyway, lightless under the night sky. The air was still, thick from the recent rainfall. The left side of his skull pressed against the ground, and a dull pain crept into his face and back. His eyes closed again. It stunk. A piece of rotting cardboard lay near his head, being foul in the foul alleyway. Wayne wished he was lying on its giving surface instead of the unrelenting concrete. What I would give, he thought, for a piece of dry cardboard. The board was propped against the back door of a rundown Greek food joint, which sent the smell of broiled lamb, brined olives, and tart yogurt into the street. Wayne felt his tongue in his mouth. It sat heavy against his cheek, tasting acid and sour breath. A plate of white fish soaked in lemon juice came to mind, and he let out a moan, which echoed in the alley. He looked up at the door and saw a fading logo that he didn't recognize, a trident. Atlas's Greek Bistro was written in a jagged blue font. Wayne could hear faint sounds of shouting coming from the door, fast and violent. He popped his ears and rubbed his eyes. Maybe the sounds were just static in his head, left over from whatever mess led him into this alley. The mess, the before. The blank space that led to this moment, the forgetting. Wayne could remember forgetting before, forgetting appointments, forgetting names, forgetting words. But Wayne couldn't remember forgetting like this. He tried recalling the day before and couldn't. He tried to recall the day before that, but had no idea when the previous day had started and had no idea when the day before that had ended. The number of days that had left his mind was a mystery. His chest tightened, and a feeling of terror crept towards him. It was interrupted by a gurgling in his stomach. He would eat first, then worry. Besides, he thought, I can't think of much to be worried about. I'm hurt, but I'm breathing. I can't remember much, but I remember my name. I'll find somewhere to eat and rest, somewhere to collect myself before diving into a state of concern. I'm in no rush to become worried. Wayne was dazed and buzzing. Looking down, he saw his wet black jacket, mangled and muddy, hugging his body. He resembled a rabbit in the rain. A sharp pain broke through his neck as he tried to lift himself from the ground. He groaned and his hand shot to rub away the feeling, his body dropping back onto the ground. He lay there for a moment, his hand braced against his neck, his breathing quick and shallow. Like most, Wayne couldn't stand discomfort. However, he believed himself to be more unfavorable of discomfort than his peers. Or perhaps he was more prone to temptation. Either way, he hated it there in the alley. It was cold and he felt bruises on his spine, arms, and neck. More than anything, he wanted to feel discomfort. Rolling onto his stomach, he was able to push himself up without the debilitating pain. Standing uneasily, Wayne braced his arm against the back door of the Greek eatery. He tried to think of the last time he had eaten Greek food. It must have been long ago, he thought. He loved olives, and it pained him when he couldn't think of the last time he had eaten one. A roach ran across his foot, hiding from the drops of water that fell from the roofs above. It scuttled under a tipped trash can, which Wayne believed must be a nice shelter for a bug like that. He thought that he ought to make his way home, wherever that may be, and draw a warm bath to soak in. Does he have a tub? He was unsure. But the Greek restaurant was right in front of him, and it must have been so very long since he last had Greek food. Now we come to a decision that must be made. On one hand, we have dolmas pasta, fresh fish and wine, dark red colamadas all soaking in brine. The food of the sea, the rich and the sweet, open the door for a good Grecian treat. And on the other hand, we have your body so cold, so battered, so hurt, this is far from the time for fresh fish and yogurt. You must pick up your feet, puff out your chest, and make your way home for some much-needed rest. The first choice will be tails, and the second choice will be heads. Oh, looks like we got heads. So we will be going with your body so cold, so battered, so hurt. This is far from the time for fresh fish and yogurt. You must pick up your feet, puff out your chest, and make your way home for some much-needed rest. Wayne made his way to the end of the alleyway. The street it led into was empty, except for a garbage truck crawling towards Wayne. He stared at its headlights, his mouth open. The light burned his eyes. In a minute, the truck rolled past, and Wayne looked into its cab and waved coyly. He could see no driver, and his wave was only met with the rumbling of a machine as it trudged down the road. Wayne looked ahead, down the now unoccupied street, and felt a tinge of hopelessness. He was lost and had no idea what he was doing, nor why he had woken up in the alleyway. He patted his pockets, hoping to find something that would help him back home. Nothing. Where was his wallet? His phone? Had he ever had either of these things? The skin on his chest began to itch, and he started making note of how his body felt. There was a dull ache in his hips. His elbows were scraped. There was a knot in his neck, most likely from being passed out on the concrete. How long had he been in that alley? He looked at his shoes, which were soaked through and smeared with dirt. The feet inside begged for air, but roaches and broken glass kept the shoes on. Wayne sucked air in through his nose and rocked back and forth on the balls of his feet, stretching out his calves. The street stretched before him. Yellow lights hung atop intersections, blinking for the empty roads. Signs marked corners: Warner Street, Bernard Street, Webster Way. Webster Way. The sign made Wayne grin. He enjoyed the two W's and the way the name sounded in his head. Webster Way. The name was close to his own, and he let it bounce inside his head as he wandered down the sidewalk. He kept his eyes turned toward the ground, hoping for a stray quarter or dime, something he could use to pay for a bus ticket once he remembered where home was. He walked with his eyes fixed on the ground for 2 more blocks before his path was interrupted. A large toad sat in the middle of the path before him. Wayne studied it. A bulge on his neck slowly inflated and deflated, and it let out a low croak. Wayne couldn't recall ever having seen a toad in the streets of Boston. He wondered whether he was still in Boston, or even still in Massachusetts. The thought of having left Massachusetts and not realizing it scared him, so he closed his eyes tight and rubbed his temples. He took a deep breath in. He opened his eyes. The toad was no longer at his feet. He looked up and scanned the sidewalk. It had moved to the other side of the street. "This is the first toad I have ever seen," he thought, "so I will follow it." He didn't know where he lived, and there was no one around to ask for help, so he figured the toad would have to do. It hopped lazily down the street, Wayne on its heels. "This is the first toad I have ever seen," he thought again, "and I am seeing it under such strange, mysterious circumstances." The toad continued hopping, stopping every few feet to let out a croak before continuing down the paved street. The buildings that Wayne and the toad passed seemed to be mostly apartments, each one completely dark. Wayne spotted a few restaurants and salons, but not a single one was open. He peeked into a few, hoping to see someone closing up or cleaning the floors, but saw no one. He lost track of how many blocks he had walked. Just as he began thinking that following the toad would be a total waste of energy, the toad turned off down a side street. The street stopped after a few meters, ending in a cul-de-sac that served as a parking lot for a park. The toad kept hopping along, reaching the cul-de-sac and continuing along a dirt path that led into the park. The path was surrounded by pines and lit up by the yellow glow of a lamppost. Wayne trailed the toad down until they came to a small pond, which the toad hopped into with a plop. Wayne looked into the water and could make out his reflection on the calm surface. His hair had streaks of dirt in it, and a rash had caused patches of red to crop up on his cheeks and down his neck. He looked around the pond for somewhere to sit and take his shoes off. His eyes skimmed across the bank until they reached the opposite side of the water, where a wooden bench sat neatly under the beam of a lamppost. A woman sat there, looking enormous under a peculiar amount of bulky clothes and blankets. Wayne made his way towards the bench, walking along the stones that made up the pond's edge. The sight of the woman calmed him, perhaps because she was the first person he had seen that night, or perhaps because of something much more mystical and possibly sinister. She smelled of garlic. "Funny to see someone out this late," she said to Wayne as he approached. Her face barely peeked out behind a scarf and sagging hood. Wayne thought she resembled a clam. She stared at Wayne with small eyes. "Do you need to eat?" She spoke to Wayne as if he were a dog. Wayne acted accordingly. His tongue pushed past his lips and spilled onto his chin. She pulled up the bottom of one of her many coats and revealed a form wrapped in tinfoil. The smell of garlic became overwhelming, and Wayne's stomach began to groan. As the feeling of hunger hit his stomach, he reached out his hands. The woman unwrapped the foil and tore off a chunk of the loaf it contained. It resembled bread, only the crust was a greenish hue and the texture of leather. It glistened in the light of the lamppost. The woman began handing over the chunk of loaf, but stopped before she met Wayne's hand. She looked at him in the eyes. Now, it might not taste the best, but you better not spit it out. The last man to pass my way turned his nose at me and ended up nearly dead. She waited for a response from Wayne. Again, we come to a decision that must be made. The first option, eat the loaf, Wayne, you are lonely and hurt. Take this good gift or end up in the dirt. And the second option, don't trust this strange figure with her leathery bread. She could be a sick killer and poison you dead. We will let the first option be heads and the second option be tails. Oh, and we got tails. So we are going to go with the second option. Wayne looked at her quizzically. He did not want to be like the last man, but he did not trust the woman enough to even believe that there was a last man. No thanks, he said, shaking his head. She looked at him with cold eyes. I insist. Please, eat. Wayne broke her stare. No thanks. He wandered from the bench. Her voice called after him, a harsh croak. Curse your spirit, your will, and your soul. A body possessed is not yours to control. Roaches, roaches, roaches in flame follow the voices to torment and pain. Wayne continued walking, too tired to pay attention to the woman's cursing. The chill of the night air was making him shiver, and the terrible hunger continued to rage inside his stomach. For a second, he thought of turning around and indulging in the weird woman's offering, but the sound of her eerie rhyme continued to echo in his head, and he marched forward, back to the path he had followed the toad down. He needed to find somewhere to sit down and eat. He remembered his earlier hunt for coins and sighed, realizing he was without a single penny. It was a sad state. The thought of hotcakes came to his mind. Wedges of butter melting over a stack of hotcakes. A hotcake house. Syrup. He would worry about paying later. Wayne was back on the main road again, and morning was starting to break. The unsettling emptiness he had experienced earlier had been replaced by a few pedestrians who kept to themselves as they paced down the sidewalk. There was a rundown gas station on a nearby corner, and Wayne walked in to warm up. He asked the attendant if there was a hotcake house or anything of the sorts nearby. The attendant looked at him with his face a mess, and his shirt a mess, and his hair a mess, and gave him directions to a breakfast spot 3 blocks east. Wayne thanked the attendant, thought about stealing something to eat, decided against it, and then went outside, where a stranger asked him if he had ever touched the devil. No, I haven't, he replied. He would never touch the devil. And that is all for today. Thank you for listening. I hope you enjoyed.